Hi, I'm Snigdha Sharma and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode of Three Things, we discuss the government's decision to give emergency approval to certain foreign vaccines along with Maharashtra's new COVID restrictions. We also talk about how the lockdown in Bangladesh is affecting the election-bound border town of Petrapole in West Bengal. First, the foreign vaccines. For us Indians, the last 1 week has been marked by one after another bleak milestone. Be it the rising number of new COVID-19 cases that just missed the 2 lakh mark or the soaring number of deaths. Add to that reports of vaccine shortage from across the country. In light of such a situation, the government on Tuesday announced that vaccines that have been granted emergency approvals by the United States, the United Kingdom and Japanese regulators and those listed by the World Health Organization or WHO may be granted emergency use approval in India. So how will these approvals for foreign vaccines get fast-tracked? How will it help the ongoing vaccination drive? And what led the government to this decision? To answer these questions for us, Indian Express's Kaunain Sheriff joined us. Kaunain, to begin with, if you can tell us what were the factors that led the government to consider granting emergency approval to foreign vaccines?
So this decision has come at a time when, of course, we are seeing that different states, especially the larger states like Maharashtra, some southern states, and including some states like Odisha, have complained that there have been shortage of vaccines. If you remember that on April 1st, we opened up the vaccine for everyone who is above the age of 45. Earlier, we were only administrating the vaccines to people who had comorbidities above the age of 45 and everyone above the age of 60, and of course the doctors and the frontline workers. So in the first week of April, we saw a huge surge in demand for vaccines on the day when we opened up the vaccine for everyone above the age of 45. So in that context, there was this huge demand that we need to get a larger basket of vaccines in the Indian market so that there is more availability of the vaccine. Second is the fact that India is also witnessing a huge surge, or what we now call as a second wave of cases. In fact, we have reported almost 2 lakh cases in a single day. We are also going to cross a huge number of deaths, highest number of deaths in the next few days. So two major factors. First is the fact that there has been a huge demand for the vaccines, and India is also facing a second wave of the pandemic.
So on what basis will approval be granted to foreign vaccines?
Firstly, we need to understand that under the new drugs and clinical trial rules of 2019, any foreign manufacturer, when he applies for a license to commercially sell his vaccine, they need to conduct what we call as a bridging clinical trial, which is the phase 2 and phase 3 study to examine the safety and the immunogenicity, which is whether it is causing any adverse reactions in the Indian population. So in a bridging study, a very small number is enrolled, around 1,000, and you conduct this clinical trial. So if you look at what happened with Serum's Covishield, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, or Dr. Reddy conducting a bridging trial of the Russian Sputnik V, they did this small bridging study. So this precondition has been waived off now. So any foreign vaccine that wants to come to India does not really have to conduct any of this bridging study. All it has to do is that it has to get its efficacy data, its safety data and immunogenicity data from either of the US regulator, UK regulator, the European Union regulator, the Japanese regulator, and those which are listed by the World Health Organization. So if you have got approval from any of these regulators, you can automatically come to India, submit your data of safety, your efficacy, and your immunogenicity, and on the basis of that data, the approvals can be granted.
In that case, what are the rules that have been invoked for granting fast-track approvals?
Basically, there are rules which empower the regulator in extraordinary circumstances, like a pandemic. So if there is a life-threatening disease, or there is a shortage, or there's an urgent need of a vaccine or a drug, that's when these relaxations are invoked by the regulator. And hence, from this clause has been invoked, and technically, India has waived off the precondition to conduct phase 2 and 3 clinical trials in the Indian side. That's what has happened right now.
Okay, so what happens once they get the approval?
As soon as they receive the approval, actually, there is a special clause that has been introduced, which means that the foreign manufacturers first have to assess the safety of the vaccine in the first 100 beneficiaries for 7 days and submit the data to the regulator. So the safety data has to be generated, but in the commercial aspect. So it's basically like a post-marketing surveillance. So that's the first thing. And parallelly, it has to conduct a bridging clinical trial, but it can roll out the vaccine.
So, based on that, approximately, when can we expect to see these foreign vaccines available in India? And also, which are the ones that we are likely to see soon?
On the timeline, it is very, very individual companies. Like, I mean, I can tell you that Johnson and Johnson was planning to apply in India. It had in fact told the regulators that they would be soon conducting a bridging trial in India to bring its single dose vaccine. So under this new rule now, they need not actually conduct the bridging trial, and they can enter the market very soon. That development we would see soon in India. The second is Pfizer, who had earlier applied in India. In fact, in Pfizer's case, the Indian regulator had sought more data. So that also now, I think there would be some movement that we could see related to Pfizer, because now Pfizer can use this route and directly apply in India. And the most significant thing is for the vaccine that is now being stockpiled by Serum Institute, which is the Novavax. Serum calls it Covovax. Novavax is an American vaccine, which is still yet to get authorization, but is soon be getting authorization either by the WHO or the UK regulators. So if they get an authorization there, then this vaccine is being stockpiled currently by Serum Institute. So we could also see Novavax entering India much more earlier than what we thought. So right now, there are three promising candidates which can make use of this route. First is Johnson and Johnson, second is Pfizer, and third is Serum's Covovax. We could also see Moderna entering, because Moderna has already received an approval. But the most interesting thing is that there are some Chinese vaccines which are under the process of getting approval by the WHO. So it would be interesting to see whether any of these Chinese vaccines would want to actually enter the Indian market. The most known faces are Sinopharm, which is a big government company which is producing its vaccine. We have 2-3 other vaccines which are under consideration by the WHO, Chinese vaccines. So they could also potentially use this route to enter the Indian market.
Now, before we go any further, let us understand why Johnson & Johnson has gone ahead and told the government of India of its intention to bring its single-dose vaccine to India, despite running into a hurdle in the United States. The American regulator has temporarily paused its use following reports of blood clots. But this does not affect Johnson & Johnson's application to India, because it had already received approvals from WHO on 12th of March. Now, moving on to the question of how the entry of foreign vaccines will affect our ongoing inoculation drive. Listen to Kaunain as he answers this for us.
So one should remember that most of these candidates, which is the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, have already made advanced commercial commitments to supply millions of doses to other countries. These vaccine manufacturers have also made commitments to the COVAX facility under the WHO, which is being funded by the Gavi Alliance, the CEPI, and the Melinda Bill Gates Foundation. So most of these doses would first go to them, then come to India. So that timeline is still unclear, but it would take some time. However, considering the fact that India is considered as the vaccine capital, these doses could be imported and India could fill and finish, or there could be what we call as a technology transfer, like how we are seeing that Johnson & Johnson is giving its technology to one of the companies in India. We are also seeing that Sputnik V is partnering with Dr. Reddy's in India and 4 other manufacturers. So these companies could actually use the Indian facilities by partnering with Indian companies and giving them the technology, and India could use the technology and then start manufacturing. So there are 2 different ways that we could ramp up. It's too early to say when, but at least what we know is that since this regime has become liberal, the regulatory regime, we could see more number of vaccines coming to India. Maybe the timeline would be somewhere around early June and September. That's the timeline that we are looking at. But immediately we would see, of course, Sputnik coming as early as maybe next month.
On Tuesday, Maharashtra Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray announced curfew-like restrictions in the state from 8 p.m. on the 14th of April to the 1st of May. However, he stopped short of calling it a lockdown. In the more than half an hour long address to the state, Thackeray announced the strict measures exempting only essential services. He also announced a 5,476 crore relief package for those who will be affected across sectors and certain categories. According to the order issued by the administration, prohibitory orders under Section 144 have been imposed in the state from Wednesday night. To understand what is allowed, what is not, and what the relief measures entail, we had our reporter Vishwas Waghmode join us from Mumbai. He began by telling us what is allowed in the first place.
So this time government has allowed services and activities in two categories. One is essential and other is exceptional category. In the essential category, they have mentioned about hospitals, diagnostic centers, clinics, vaccinations, then veterinary services, animal care, shelters, groceries, vegetable shops, fruit vendors, dairies, bakeries, or all type of food shops. Then they have also allowed cold storage, warehousing services, public transport, then services related to the like offices of diplomats, pre-monsoon activities by the local authorities as monsoon is approaching soon, and all the public transport, public services by the local authorities. Then RBI and its services designated by the RBI, SEBI and SEBI recognized services, transport of goods, water supply services, import export of all commodities. They have allowed e-commerce only for the purpose of essential goods and services, petrol pumps, cargo services, data centers, garages, then ATMs, postal services. I think these are the services that they have allowed for the essential services. And for the exceptional services, what they have done is that they have allowed on the weekdays. So these include offices of the central government, state government, local governments, cooperatives, PSUs, private banks, offices of like companies that provide the essential services, insurance and medical companies, pharmaceutical companies, all non-banking financial corporations. But they have put a condition that they should work at a 50% capacity than their total capacity, and they have to follow all the COVID norms. These people have been allowed, those who work under these two categories, essential and exceptional, so they have been allowed a movement from one place to another place.
Now moving on to what is not allowed.
So they have not allowed, so for the private offices that they have said that they should work from home, one of the major things that the government has said that no movement in public places without valid reasons. Valid reasons are those that comes under the essential services category or exceptional services category. Except that no movement of any individual is allowed in public places. Matlab nobody can venture out of their homes just for sake of fun or any other things. Other than that, all establishments, private establishments, private offices, public places, activities will remain closed. All religious places will also remain closed. Hotels and restaurants will also will be shut, but they will be allowed only for home delivery. Cinema theaters, drama theaters, clubs, gyms, swimming pools, all public places of gardens and beaches, malls also that do not provide any essential services will also remain shut. Besides, schools and colleges, private coaching classes will also remain shut. No religious, social, political, cultural event is allowed. Here they have made an exception for a bypoll election that is being held in Solapur district for 3-4 days. On 17th, there is a polling. So after that, all these political and cultural gathering restrictions will also be, and all other restrictions will also be applicable to that assembly constitution.
The government, however, has made some exceptions for the manufacturing sector. Here, Vishwas tells us more.
So some of the people from the manufacturing center told the government that they need some days to shut down their operations and they require some days to restart their operation. So considering that request from the industry, they have allowed them to carry out the operation at 50% capacity. But these units have to house their staff within the premises or in an isolated facility close to the premises of that working unit. So this is the new restriction that they have put in for the manufacturing sector.
Now, in the lockdown guidelines, the state has left some things to the district authorities. They are to decide on the inclusion of domestic helpers, drivers, attendants, and other categories under essential services. However, the government has restricted e-commerce to the supply of essential goods and services only. The state government has also asked local authorities to take a call on staggering the supply of essential services such as groceries, vegetable shops, fruit vendors, dairies, bakeries, and all food outlets in terms of location and operation. Now coming to the relief package worth more than 5,000 crore rupees.
The government has said that 3 kg wheat and 2 kg rice per person will be given free of cost for 1 month under the free food gain scheme to the beneficiaries of food security scheme. Besides that, there is a Shiv Bhojan Thali here, which is like a government scheme providing a day's meal at a cheaper rate. So government has said that that meal, which is being served at rupees 5, will now be served free for 1 month, and it has kept a target of like serving 2 lakh thalis in 1 month. Besides, the government has also said that 1500 rupees will be given to each licensed hawker and auto rickshaw drivers, those who are registered with the government. So this amount will also be given only one time amount for 1 month. Besides that, the tribal families who are availing the benefits of the Kautik Karz, which is normally a small loan for non-agricultural purposes, so they will be also given rupees 2000 per family under this relief package. The government has also said that there are approximately 12 lakh construction workers, registered construction workers in the state. So they will be given 1500 rupees a month, but this is for only 1 month. And besides that, the government has made a large allocations for the pension schemes that the government has implementing. So it has made large provisions for that, so that people who are getting the pension benefits from the government scheme will get rupees 1000 in advance for next 2 months.
And finally, coming to West Bengal. A little more than a week ago, a complete lockdown was announced in the neighbouring country of Bangladesh. The effects of the measure were felt across the border at Petrapole, the largest land customs station in the entire continent of Asia. Located about 80 kilometers away from Kolkata, Petropole's entire local economy runs on businesses from across the border. However, since the pandemic hit last year, the flourishing economy has taken a battering. With the fearsome second wave of the virus, the fear of another lockdown post the Bengal elections looms large in the border town. Our reporter Dipankar Ghose visited Petrapole for a ground report recently to find out what is going on. He began by telling us more about the place.
So, as you know, West Bengal and Bangladesh have a fairly long border, but a lot of it is very porous, unmanned. There's a lot of movement that happens both places. But Petrapole is the one big land port between India and Bangladesh. It is where a lot of the formal business happens, exporters, importers, people that are coming in on medical visas, etc. Petrapole is in the North 24 Parganas district. It's in the Bangaon region. And yeah, it is the one big land port. So if you have formal business to do and you have a visa, that Petrapole is where you cross into Bangladesh and Bangladeshis cross into India and vice versa.
So Dipankar, how has Petrapole been dealing with the pandemic?
Rural India, if you look at COVID, is because there is not enough paraphernalia in and around COVID. The messaging hasn't really reached the villages. And generally in India's villages, COVID hasn't struck as much as to, for people to be dying, for bodies, etc., to be piling up thus far, quote unquote. There isn't as much, concern about COVID per se. There is still generally this sense that COVID is largely an urban phenomenon. And that is something that is a refrain you'll hear continuously. If you look at rural Bengal, you'll find very, very little mask usage, very little. You'll find very little social distancing. That's just not something that has become par for the course despite 1 year of this happening. But what does affect people is lockdowns, and Petrapole particularly.
So how did the lockdown affect the place?
So before March, there were three kinds of people that would exchange between India and Pakistan, three kinds of visas: business, medical, and visitor visas. So primarily on the Indian side, your business is driven by people that are coming in from Bangladesh. So in March last year, visitors visas stopped, or so people in Petrapole say. So the only people that were coming in were people that were on business visas or on medical visas. Now, for medical visas, Dhaka is 7 hours away from the Petrapole border, so people would come from different places across Bangladesh and then drive to Kolkata, which is about 100 kilometers away. There was a huge industry that had kind of grown around it. So on the Petrapole border, you'll find travel agencies, you'll find private taxis, you'll find tempos, you'll find buses, you'll find this entire industry that caters to people that are coming in from Bangladesh, and that is the local industry, primary local industry of that small town. Now, when you're walking in, so in March, let us say the visitor visa stopped. So a lot of the business had already dropped. So we met some people of a travel agency called Desh Travels. Now, Desh Travels is one of the biggest ones there. If you walk into their shop, they have a counter, then they have a huge waiting room. They would have between 6 and 8 buses that were going in pre-March that had already come down to 2 buses a day, 2 or 3 maximum buses a day of people that were coming in from on business and medical visas. People that would come on medical visas would actually take a bus to Kolkata and then mostly go down to southern states where they would get cheap and good medical treatment. Places like Vellore were mentioned, etc. Now, what happened in last Monday in Bangladesh was that Bangladesh went into full lockdown. So while those visas might still be issued, people were not being able to come to the border, to the Bangladesh border to cross over into India. So a business that was already depressed completely. So people that have 25 staff now have 10. Even those are sitting around buses you're not being able to pay EMIs on. All of that, the local economy has been completely broken. And this new lockdown in Bangladesh would make it even worse.
So, as we can see from what Dipankar has told us so far, for Petropole it is almost like a choice between the fire and the frying pan. While they cannot afford to go through another lockdown, the threat of COVID is getting very real now, especially with the flurry of activity surrounding the assembly elections in West Bengal.
I think people are very aware that as long as elections are happening in Bengal with these huge rallies, etc., it looks unlikely that a lockdown will happen in Bengal while the elections are on. In fact, no political party, at least in their speeches, even seems to address COVID at that point. Neither the Prime Minister nor Mamata Banerjee, they don't say much about COVID. I mean, there are a few campaigners that I've seen that say, put your masks on, but it's kind of futile if you're addressing a rally of 10,000 people anyway. Now, for the businessmen in Petropole and for people that for the poorest sections that for whom lockdown is the worst and lockdown itself is as bad as COVID is, and that is a very real, that is a huge reality of lockdowns. For those people, in fact, I've met many that said, maybe these are the one elections that should just continue because we don't want a lockdown as opposed to COVID surging. So for them, the COVID surge is less threatening than a lockdown is, but this is of course their opinion, and their opinion is driven by very economic existential concerns. But the flip side of that is that given that there is no COVID appropriate behavior at all, and we're seeing signs of spread in rural areas, it's a very complicated problem.
And finally, coming to the issue of elections. Petropole falls under the Bongaon Uttar Assembly constituency that will go to vote on 22nd of April. While in 2016 the Trinamool Congress had won the seat, in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the Assembly segment voted decisively for BJP's Matua leader Shantanu Thakur. And though the BJP is doing its best to win the Matuas again, and many believe that the BJP is indeed ahead, Dipankar found that caste has taken a backseat in Petropole. Clearly, the town has bigger issues to deal with. Here, Dipankar tells us more.
The reason why I said caste is not important is that it's not that basically in Bangaon particularly where this seat is, Bangaon Uttar, there is this sense that the BJP is very far ahead or is decently ahead. And it is because the Matua community is, while there is some resistance now, I don't think the support is as high as it was in 2019 during the Lok Sabha elections. There are some that talk about whether the BJP is being consistent in its stance pro CAA, which the Matua community is very for. And there is some doubt there, I think, there is some question about, and the TMC is kind of attacking it by saying you are already citizens. So there is some element of shift away from the BJP, but not enough, I think, to cause really an electoral upset in Bangaon. In that sense, given that the elections are about 10 days away, and this was very emergent, this Bangladesh lockdown meant that their business had dropped 50% from what it was already sold out down low. Right now, lockdown was the more immediate conversation that was happening. In that sense, caste was not important immediately right now because the lockdown is something that was affecting their stomachs, their incomes. The elections would come and go, and people will continue to vote, and people will still possibly vote on the issue of the Matuas because the Matuas still believe that despite their dithering, the BJP is perhaps their only hope of quote unquote citizenship that they're looking for.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Snigdha Sharma, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. You can follow us and leave us feedback on Facebook or Twitter at Express Podcasts, or send us an email at podcasts@indianexpress.com. And if you like this show, please do subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcast from so more people can find us. You can also look for us in the audio section in the top right corner of our website, indianexpress.com.